There's no kind of contractual commitment by Delta, and there never would be in these scenarios. But it is for the foreseeable future. This was not only November, December. I think people thought about New York during the holidays and thought that this was just some kind of quick 60-day event. This is service that will continue and will evolve as we move forward, and we hope that we're able to keep it. But another additional perk to this is we see a lot of nonstop service increases during the summer months because, of course, the beach, and that's why 85% of our tourism here comes here for the beach, and so it's not uncommon to see additional nonstop routes April to August. So to get one in November, I think is and again another good testament to the positive trajectory we have here in the city. So very excited about that. The recycling, let's talk about that. I was able to get the data point. So we asked the citizens, would you be willing to pay $8 to $10 more a month to have recycling at the curb? And while it's unfortunate that monetary amount has to be the way that you can delineate between people who truly want to recycle and the folks that may be using it only as a second garbage can, that is what we're equipped with at this moment. And so 50% of our residents said that they would be willing to pay the $8 to $10 more a month. Now, we also understand there's a big difference between answering that question on a survey and then when the bill comes. So, will you be committed to it? So, conservatively, if we were to say half of those folks would actually pull through and say we have 21,000 accounts, in my mind, that gives us a conservative estimate that maybe 5,000 to 5,500 accounts would be willing to do it when it comes down to putting it on your bill. And what that equips us with, which is really valuable, is now we're able to go to potential third-party operators that would want to potentially provide the curbside service. We are not going to provide it in-house at sanitation. It would be an ECOA or a waste management that would come in. But why this data is important is we're able to go to those folks and say, hey, based on this estimate of 5,000 to 5,500 accounts, is there enough critical mass to get that price into a feasible range? And so that's the process we're in right now. Is we've been able to give that data. I sent it to ECOA and Waste Management yesterday to say here's some good solid data you can count on, and let's see how what the numbers come back and what they look like based on that. And so we'll wait to hear back from both of them. We've had additional meetings with a group that's working in Mobile called the Osprey Initiative. We have just had a call yesterday with the American Beverage Association, who's also very invested. As you can imagine, Coca-Cola, Buffalo Rock, and others are very invested in being able to get some of those recyclables back and have grant programs and funding in order to help in those efforts. So we had a great productive call with them, and so we continue to forge ahead as we promised we would, is that we're being intentional about looking for solutions after going to twice a week garbage service on October 1st. So we'll wait to hear back on the curbside. The Osprey Initiative is more on the manned drop-off facilities. And then the final thing, we're going to take an effort internally to be able to offer something temporarily. We're in the next 30 days, we're hoping to have set up perhaps a once-a-week recycling drop-off at our transfer station on Leonard. That we would it'd be a manned facility. We'd have a city staff person there, and you'd be able to just drive up, drop off your recyclables there, and we would take them right at the transfer station. So we don't look at that as the expectations that that's all we're going to do, but it was our ability to be able to do something, to be able to offer something. We are going to limit what can be dropped off, and this is going to be thematic with any approach we have in recycling moving forward. One of the biggest downfalls we had was we took anything that met the definition of recyclable, even though those things would end up in the landfill because they didn't have any value or any market. So we're going to be focused solely on aluminum and steel cans. Think about canned goods on the steel side. Aluminum and steel cans, plastic bottles like Coke bottles, 2-liter bottles, and then the heavier plastic, which would be your Tide, your detergent bottles, milk jugs, things like that. So our focus in the short term at that drop-off facility, when we get that date announced, is going to be only those materials. It's not going to be cardboard and glass and other things like that. I'm not saying that that's all we're committed to long term, but it's going to be an abbreviated amount of materials no matter what we do, because we want there to be a market for them and we want them to help the environment. and not just take them because they meet a definition that they can be recycled, but that they actually will be recycled. So, so again, progress continues there, and we will be back with you on an open date and some additional details when we get those finalized with our sanitation department about a drop-off. Our our Summit Boulevard drop-off facility will remain at this point. As you can imagine, we've already started to see an uptick, even though recycling still continues. But we will, and as I remind everyone, that facility is as contaminated or more potentially because it's unmanned and people are dropping off all sorts of items, including household furniture and everything else. So that is not a viable solution for us long term. But again, to just try to afford another option, we'll continue to have that recycling drop-off open in the short term here as we start to solidify where we're going. So that's where we are with recycling. Bay Bluffs Park, I'm going to give this another attempt. There's a little confusion, I think, reported out there between the difference between permanent and indefinite. And what we're saying is we have never said that we would demolish Bay Bluffs Park and not replace it permanently. That has never been said, and obviously with some emails I'm getting, I think there's been a miscommunication as far as that. Indefinite, all we're saying is it's not definitive in terms of when we would have the funding to rebuild it. We have many projects on the books right now. We are indefinite on when the seawall at Wayside Park is going to be built. We're indefinite on when the airport terminal is going to be, even though it's in design. That we have not procured that funding officially. So this fits the same mold. The reason we need to demo it is because of how it's going to be used, and frankly, how it has been used since March, which is that the park has been closed, and of course we have people jumping over the signs and using it anyway, which has the same risk of someone getting hurt as if we had it open. And that the reason that we have prioritized demolishing it before we have procured that funding is from a safety concern. It's an outdoor thing that is very, very hard to secure, as we've already seen. And so getting it demolished, knowing that is the most viable option moving forward, is why we've prioritized demolish before having the funds to procure, to replace it. But we continue to look at those options like we do in many projects in the city that we want to have done, but just don't have the funding secured. So we will continue to be aggressive about that. We've gotten, of course, many emails about it. We've had some very productive emails of folks saying, hey, how can we help? Is there a way? It's important to me. I grew up here. And I remind a lot of people, I grew up across the street, actually in 2 different places from Bay Bluffs Park. I've been there many, many times. I went to school on Hyde Park Road for 6 years. I spent many afternoons down there. There's no reason why I would want to do that if it wasn't the only option that we have. And so we will continue to aggressively look for solutions. But the reason, just to be clear, the reason we're demoing without the funds is that from a safety issue, that we can't just put a barricade up with a park closed sign on it and hope that no one's going to use it. And because of the uniqueness of that park and the way it's constructed and the way it's utilized. So that's where we are there. We'll continue to look for options. I got a District 3 town hall tonight at 5:30 with Councilman Casey Jones. That's at the Bayview Community Center. And as you'll notice, if you wake up in the morning and your recycling can has disappeared, that is intentional. This is the week that we are picking up those recycling cans, so you don't have to worry. We won't come looking for it or put anything on your bill. But of course, starting next week is when you'll start to have the twice-a-week garbage pickup, and we've done a pretty good job, I think, communicating what those dates are for everyone moving forward. But we, of course, have, if you go to cityofpensacola.com/recycling info, that will give you everything you need to know on the recycling side, as well as the information you need about the new service moving forward. So the last thing, just left a very productive meeting with Baptist Hospital that we had at 8:30 this morning, which is our largest substantive discussion we've had to date in terms of a potential donation agreement between Baptist Hospital and the City of Pensacola on the donation of their parcels, their acreage of land there, while we, of course, go advocate at any level we can, state or federal level, to procure some funding So more details to be worked out. They had shared some of their initial thoughts. Of course, we were able to review those, and we gave them some of our thoughts and concerns. So definitely a work in progress at this point, but we of course have urgency on this, and our full expectation is to be ready to go in October. The agreement may not have ink on it on both sides, but the philosophical idea that we can go to Tallahassee and go to Washington, D.C. this fall is very much realistic, and that is the expectation of both sides, is that we know enough and we agree on enough to be prepared to go shoulder to shoulder out there to try to procure some of this funding to be able to get the building demolished. So more to come on that, but we had a great meeting, and we are very much aligned in knowing that the impact of what this legacy campus can be, how it is important to the surrounding community, how it's important to the future of the city. So I am confident in that moving forward. I'm confident in our team, and I just don't like to sign up to do things that we can't execute. And so we wanted to make sure that it's aligned on things that we think are realistic and that we can get across the finish line. So very excited to continue those conversations and to get something solidified moving forward. But that is it for me, and happy to take your questions.
On the data about recycling, were you able to cluster it into neighborhoods so they can have a handle on what parts of the city, so they would know a route would be?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do have it answered by district. So and that was one of the questions that came up preliminarily with one of the vendors. Was they said, well, it's one thing to say 5,000 people want it. It's another because of the logistics of how far they're, from one end to the other. And my expectation, the only realistic way to get it done in my mind is that whoever would come in and do it would have to do it in 2 days, which is doable because it's such a smaller, it's not 21,000 accounts, it's going to be less. But because I would want that aligned with one of your other pickups, right? So we wouldn't want someone to have to go to the curb 3 times. It would be Monday you bring your recycling can, your trash can, and then Thursday just your trash can kind of thing. So I haven't memorized that. I looked briefly at the districts, but we are going to be able to equip them with a rough idea to say, hey, District 4 rated this higher, you're more likely that you're going to have folks in District 4.
Potential 6,000 customers.
Correct.
In this area.
And so because we have the crosstabs of that Haas survey, it's going to be broken. We're going to be able to break it out by any other demographic we have, male, female, income, district location, any of that. We should be pretty ripe with data that any of those folks may want to see.
When do you expect to have the Haas Center budget?
Mid-October. As I said, all I've seen, and very briefly, of course, I scrolled right down to that question. That was the first one I wanted to know the answer to, but we've just got the raw data right now that I've been able to see. So I know we'll have a consolidated report, and all the raw data will be, the intent is mid-October, but obviously if there's some specific questions along those lines, or if there's something that we can publish or get out to you between now and then, certainly we'll do that.
What do you think is a realistic timeline on getting a third-party vendor starting curbside service?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to commit to that only because I don't know what their startup, I don't know their world enough to know, that if we agreed to something tomorrow, how long would it take them to get, are they having to hire folks? Are they having to buy equipment? Those kinds of things. I couldn't say how long, but what I would say is, again, I've emailed both potential parties. Of course, Waste Management, they're opening a MRF in Fort Walton Beach, coming up here pretty soon. So both Waste Management and EC Way, obviously we're going to give them, both an opportunity to look at that. And I wouldn't rule out that the city's willing to subsidize, on that front. We just want to understand what the total cost is and how much. And so, if it's $11 instead of $10, it doesn't mean that it's out. But I have no idea where that's going to land. We picked that number because we think it's something significantly more than that's going to be a pretty heavy lift. So it's not that there's so much science behind that $8 to $10 number. We wanted to put something on there, not just say, because if we asked the question without that, if we just said, would you be willing to pay, for recycling, then it would have probably been much higher, yes, because people think it might be $1 a month. So, and what we've seen, and I would imagine ECUA has felt this based on their pricing model, is even when you make it an opt-in, if it's not enough of a financial delta between the two, if it was to be $1 a month or $2 a month, you're going to end up in the same place that you're already in, which is if it's cheaper than just getting a second garbage can, then people are going to pick, understandably, they're going to pick the cheaper option. And I think that's what's happened at the city and at the county is right now, until October 1st, you've had a recycling can that was free. And if you wanted a second garbage can instead, you would pay. And so people treated the recycling can as a second garbage can if they didn't care about recycling. So yeah, hard to say right now. I'd hate to speculate on that, but all I can say is we're moving as urgently as we can, and it's something that's at the top of my list that we continue to move forward. I already have another meeting set up with the American Beverage Association next week to talk about some potential grant opportunities, and then now I just wait to hear back from those two potential vendors.
On your meeting with Baptist Hospital this morning, you said there's a lot of alignment on everything. What do you see as any potential roadblocks to getting an agreement?
After this morning, I don't see any. I don't see any roadblocks to an agreement. I think the biggest lift we have is an 8-figure, amount that's got to have to be raised, and that donation agreement. The general format of that is going to be, if the city is able to help procure X dollars in funding for demolition, then the property would be donated. So the city's not taking possession of the entire parcel ahead of time with the idea that if we don't get the funding. So that I would say hurdle or any kind of pitfall, the biggest one is the one that we're both aligned in is, can we go get the funding? And we've got great partners at the state level. Our state delegation, of course, Senator Broxson, this is on his radar. And what we need to do, our job one right now is to get shoulder to shoulder on what that ask is and get that to our delegation and start pounding the pavement and trying to figure out how to get that funded. So I don't really see any particular hurdles. There are some things that we've asked for, some smaller things, some potential property donation ahead of the procurement of funds that could revert back to them if we don't get them. There's some little details that we're considering right now that they're looking at. But I would say from the things that some ideas they floated out and ideas we floated out, I didn't leave the meeting with any thought that we would end up not being able to get an agreement done.
What's the acreage that's involved? What buildings are you looking at demolishing?
So what I would consider the minimum acreage of this donation request is about 36 acres, and understand that's their parcel less the PACE's proposals that are still in play at this point up until, I believe, December 1st, I think, is when we would expect to hear, maybe a little later, but when we'd expect to hear whether they're able to get those tax credits that have been mentioned. What would happen from there is one thing we're discussing. Potentially the city, if PACE's were to not get those, that the city would procure that as part of the donation request. And if they were able to get the tax credit, then it would stay at the smaller amount. That's a perfect example of what from Jim's question. Those are the things that we're pretty much in alignment on, but we just need to work through and put them in ink. That's where we are, in terms of the acreages. I would think kind of a minimum of that number and perhaps larger based on some other variables.
Is the PACE's property dependent on any demolition?
No.
Okay. All right.
The PACE's property that's proposed now is to the west of the main campus, so it was there is no demolition of really
That parking lot area.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So what buildings do they want to have demolished?
So it's really, it's not so much what they would want to have demolished. What we know is that the main campus, and I would say is well over 95% of the total demolition cost of the entire site, because there's very few. There's some small. There's the one behavioral health building that's 4 stories, about 50,000 square feet. Then there's those other, there's some other much smaller buildings, 4,000 or 5,000 square feet that, the demolition and abatement costs on those.
Would it include the tower and the hospital?
Yes.
Okay.
So
it really is a huge. Okay.
correct. I mean, I would say, again, well over 95% of the lift that we're going to go is going to be for the hospital and the tower.
Okay.
Yeah, because of the abatement and, and all the other ones, the only other one that has some significant size to it is that 4-story building. And we're not even, neither Baptist nor us, there could be a scenario where those are kept. There could be a scenario where those are demolished. So what we're primarily focused on, both of us, Baptist, is the huge lift of getting the towers and the main hospital demolished.
I assume, will the city have, for the smaller buildings that may still have potential reuse, will the city have a say in which buildings, will the say which buildings will remain, and will the city will y'all be doing the demo work, or will it be Baptist, or how's that going?
Yeah, I'm on the second one. I would imagine, given the grant funding, that it's going to be that donation request will probably have to take place, because these are going to be state funds that are going to need to be used on publicly owned property. So again, that's not my expertise, but I would tell you my assumption is that demolition will have to happen on city-owned property, first and foremost. Secondly, I think we would analyze each one of those when the donation is made. I think the city would analyze each one of those outlying parcels, case by case. Is there some value to keeping it? If this is going to be a master planned kind of affordable housing, community development, well, then they may all need to be demolished, the ancillary buildings, based on the footprint. So there's a lot of variables on whether we would or wouldn't demolish any of the other buildings. Now, I saved that to say, the Kupfrian house and the history of that. I mean, that would be one exception that I can't see a scenario where that building would be demolished in the long term, but any of the others, the ones kind of south on Marino, all that, I think we would just continue to look at. And Baptist, my feeling is Baptist doesn't necessarily have a position on that one way or the other. I think it's that they'd be donating the property to the city for the city to determine that moving forward.
Is there any part of the negotiation that involves Baptist keeping some kind of presence there or anything like that?
They are going to have some parcels there. I can't speak for what offices are going to be there, or what services are going to be there. The acreage that we're talking about does exclude some buildings, mainly a couple on the east side of E Street and some other things. So, I don't want to speak to what they want to do or not want to do. I can speak to what we want to do is. We want to do what is best for the community and best for the neighborhood, and if there's opportunity or we see a need or to meet demand, and that's something that the city can play a role in, then we'll certainly entertain that. As I said, I don't want to put words in their mouth of what they're willing to do or not do. Most of our conversation's been centered around just the transactional part of getting a donation agreement in place, so we can again march forward with trying to get some demolition money.
On the Bay Bluffs Park issue, there's obviously, I'm sure you're aware, there's a lot of reaction on social media to the announcement and everything, and I guess there is some criticism out there that the city finds money to do other projects. Why not find money to do this project? What's your kind of reaction to that?
Well, the city finds money to do projects all the time, and it's never the day after they demolish something either. I mean, I think, look, I get it. I think the community, this is something that's been in place for many, many years, since before I was born, I believe, and that it's important to them. And so when you hear that it's going to be demolished without some solution, it's frustrating and raises anxiety, and I totally understand that. Again, this has been closed since March. We're going on 6 months of it being closed, and I'd make an argument that moving forward with demolition, which means having urgency on getting it funded, is a better step than where we were 30 days ago, which is a closed park with really no plan to move forward. Now, what we were doing in that meantime was we were looking for ways. Could we extend the life of this park? Could we spend a little bit of money and get another 3 or 5 years out of it? We couldn't find that scenario. We couldn't find a scenario that allowed us to go put boards in certain places and then be able to continue to say that it's a safe place. So I understand everybody's frustration. I'm frustrated. This is not why I signed up to be mayor, is to close parks and buildings that haven't been maintained. That's not what I want to do. And I love this park like the other folks do, and it's something that was part of my childhood, like it was for so many people emailing me talking about that. So we'll continue to move ahead. But the reason we have to demolish, and I think that might be part of where the confusion is because of the nature of the park itself, which is that there's only so much we can do to secure something that's unsafe. If this was a building, think about Malcolm Young. If this is a building, we can lock the doors, right? This is a very difficult park to lock the doors on, and we know that we've tried that for about 6 months and it hadn't been real effective. And so that's why we're needing that perhaps maybe in a more conventional scenario, and that's what our citizens are referring to, that we would spend a little more time finding funding before we would commit to the demolition. In a brick and mortar structure, that would make more sense. That would be a more conventional way. But because of the nature of how this park is used and the fact that you can't really keep eyes on it, and that's what causes us to need to go ahead from a safety perspective to demolish it and then figure out what we want to do from there. And I said last week, there's a very real possibility that it is not going to be replaced verbatim the way it's set up right now. There might be, maybe there's walking path elements of it. Maybe the boardwalk goes a different direction for cost reasons, for safety reasons, and otherwise. I mean, this park was designed 40 years ago. A lot of erosion's happened since then. A lot of other things have happened since then. So it's much more likely that this park ends up with some kind of, really in a new version that when it is funded than what sits out there today. So the demolition is going to happen one way or the other. It's just we have to speed that up a little bit, the priority of that up a little bit, given the safety concerns. So that doesn't mean we aren't committed to finding funding like we are with every project. We are committed to, and frankly, I feel pretty good about our track record so far of having projects that need to be funded and figuring out how to get them across the finish line. So, I ask for a little patience and let our awesome staff and our grants office, our administration, let us get to work and figure out how to get this thing done. But I'm not here to overpromise anybody or create unrealistic expectations or burden our staff with those. We're going to do what we think is the next best thing for the city, which is demolish, and we'll continue to be active in how we fund the potential repairs and what that new park will look like moving forward. Anything else? All right. Thank you, guys.